Well, hello there, fellow adventurers, and welcome back to our little corner of the world, which, as you know, is mostly on wheels these days. Mark here, and beside me, as always, is Karen, the resident dreamweaver and, occasionally, the instigator of what I affectionately call mildly terrifying adventures. We're parked up in what can only be described as a postcard from the French Pyrenees, mountains rearing up like benevolent giants, their peaks dusted with the last stubborn patches of spring snow. The air, let me tell you, is so clean it practically polishes your lungs with every breath. It's days like these, waking up to the gentle clinking of sheep bells from a distant field and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee in our trusty van, serendipity, that you remember exactly why you traded a perfectly good three-bedroom semi for a life measured in kilometers and memorable moments. But this morning, there was a particular glint in Karen's eye. It's a glint I've come to recognize. It usually precedes a sentence beginning with, "You know, I was just thinking," and often ends with me wondering how I'm going to explain our latest escapade to our mildly bewildered adult children. We'd been meandering through the foothills, enjoying the slow pace, the incredible food, the sheer, unadulterated beauty of rural France. The plan, if you could call our fluid intentions a plan, was to drift slowly towards the coast. Simple, right? Mark, she began, her voice laced with that familiar brew of excitement and meticulous research, I was reading this obscure little blog last night, written by a very eccentric old gentleman who apparently documented dying folk traditions in southwestern France back in the 70s. I took a slow sip of my coffee, bracing myself. "Oh, here we go," I murmured, but there was a smile playing on my lips. "This is the spice of our life, after all." He mentioned something called the Fête du Murmure Divine, she continued, undeterred by my theatrics. The Festival of the Whispering Vines. It's supposedly held by a tiny, almost forgotten community of winemakers in a valley so hidden, it's not on any modern maps. They celebrate the awakening of the ancient vines, a pre-Christian ritual almost, to bless the harvest. He said it was the most authentic, untouched celebration he'd ever witnessed. And this blog post was from the 70s? I raised an eyebrow. Sweetheart, that's 50 years ago. Chances are this hidden valley is now a housing estate with a very prominent Starbucks. Karen unfurled a rather crumpled, hand-drawn map she'd apparently printed from this equally ancient blog. It looked like something a pirate might discard for being too vague. Not according to this. And he gave very specific, if rather poetic, landmarks. Turn left at the weeping willow that kisses the river bend, follow the path of the sun until the three sleeping giants guard the valley's mouth. Right, I said, trying to sound reasonable. So, we're looking for poetic geology and amorous trees. And what if it doesn't exist anymore? Or what if these forgotten winemakers don't particularly want to be remembered by a couple of slightly lost Brits in a campervan? But what if it does exist, Mark? Her eyes shone. Imagine it. A tradition passed down for centuries, untouched by tourism. A real glimpse into the soul of this land. She leaned forward, the map rustling. It's the kind of thing we dream about finding, isn't it? The reason we're out here. This is Karen's craziest van life idea yet, and I think you should go along with it, she grinned, quoting what I often say with a chuckle when she suggests something particularly outlandish. And there it was. The challenge, the allure, the sheer improbability of it all. That's the catnip, isn't it? For us, anyway. Trading a life of predictable routine for the wild, wonderful what-ifs. After 50 years on this planet, you learn that the craziest ideas often lead to the best stories. So, with a sigh that was only partly for show, I refilled my coffee cup. All right, my love. Show me these weeping willows and sleeping giants. Let's go find a whisper. My own sense of adventure, never too deeply buried, began to stir. What's the worst that could happen? A few wasted days driving through beautiful countryside? There are worse fates. Our first task was to even approximate a starting point on a modern GPS. Karen's ancient map was a masterpiece of charming obscurity. The village that sleeps by the silver stream could be any one of a dozen hamlets in this region, I pointed out, tracing a finger across our far more detailed Michelin map. But he mentions it's near a ruined Templar watchtower, Karen countered, peering at her printout. And there's one marked here, see? About 30 kilometers south of us. So, serendipity, our faithful home on wheels, was pointed south. The landscape began to change subtly. The mountains softened into rolling hills, patterned with vineyards that stretched like green corduroy under the increasingly warm sun. We passed through villages where time seemed to have paused around 1955, old men in berets watching the world go by from a cafe stoop, their conversations a low, melodic hum. It was idyllic, but there was no sign of weeping willows kissing river bends, or indeed, any river bends of particular note. "Are you sure about this, kissing willow?" I asked after a couple of hours of fruitless searching near the designated Templar ruin, which turned out to be a rather disappointing pile of stones in a farmer's field. Karen consulted her notes. He was very specific. Its branches dip into the water as if to steal a secret. Perhaps the river has changed course. Or the willow, well, died of old age. She sounded a little less confident now, a rare occurrence. We decided to try a different approach, local knowledge. We pulled into a slightly larger village, one that boasted a small epicure and a boulangerie. While Karen stocked up on essentials, cheese that smelled gloriously pungent and bread still warm from the oven, I decided to try my schoolboy French on the proprietor of the epicure, a stern-looking woman with arms like oak branches. "Excusez-moi, madame," I began, carefully enunciating. "Nous cherchons un valet, un valet caché, avec de vignes, anciennes." I was trying to ask if she knew of a hidden valley with ancient vines. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then she barked a question in rapid-fire French that sounded suspiciously like, "Are you feeling quite well, monsieur?" My French, it seemed, was not up to the task. I stammered something about a fete and vieux vignerons, old winemakers. She just shook her head, muttering about les Anglais faux, crazy English people, and turned to serve the next customer. Strike one for local intelligence. Back in the van, Karen was more optimistic. "Maybe we need to find someone older. Someone who might remember these old stories." We spent the rest of the day driving down increasingly narrow lanes, serendipity brushing against overgrown hedgerows. We found several willows by several rivers, none of which seemed to be engaged in any particularly amorous activities. The three sleeping giants remained stubbornly elusive. We did, however, discover a delightful little spot by a gurgling stream where we decided to camp for the night. The frogs provided a lively evening chorus. Maybe your eccentric blogger was just that, eccentric. I ventured gently as we sat outside, sharing a bottle of local wine that definitely hadn't come from a forgotten valley. Karen sighed, gazing at her crumpled map in the fading light. Perhaps. But there was something so sincere in his writing. He described the taste of the wine, the sound of the old songs they sang. It felt real, there was a wistful note in her voice. This wasn't just about an adventure for her, it was about connecting with something authentic, something easily lost in our fast-paced world. The next morning, we decided to try one more area, a slightly more remote series of valleys marked on our map with nothing but contour lines and the occasional dotted track. The roads, if you could call them that, were more suited to tractors than our beloved, but admittedly wide, serendipity. Several times, I had to reverse precariously, branches scraping along our paintwork, much to my silent wincing. Karen, bless her, navigated with a combination of her ancient map and a hopeful expression. I think this might be it," she suddenly exclaimed, pointing. Ahead of us, a barely discernible track, more like a deer path, veered off the rough road we were on. And to its left, by a small, almost hidden stream, was an ancient, gnarled willow, its lower branches indeed trailing into the water. It wasn't exactly kissing, more like a weary dip, but it was the closest we'd seen. And look! She was almost vibrating with excitement. Beyond the willow, the land rose sharply into three distinct, rounded hills, their silhouettes against the sky undeniably resembling slumbering figures. The sleeping giants. My skepticism, which had been growing steadily, took a small hit. Coincidence? Perhaps. But it was too compelling to ignore. Well, I said, trying to sound nonchalant, the track looks a bit challenging. Serendipity can do it. Karen declared, with more faith in our van's off-road capabilities than I entirely shared. The track was, to put it mildly, a test of nerves. It was deeply rutted, strewn with rocks, and narrowed alarmingly in places. I engaged low gear, gripping the wheel tightly, while Karen peered ahead, calling out obstacles. Big rock on the left. Deep puddle, go right, go right. Several times, I was convinced we were about to become a permanent feature of the French landscape. The undercarriage scraped ominously more than once. I made a mental note to check for damage later, assuming we ever made it out of this. It truly felt like we were venturing into a forgotten world. The air grew stiller, the sounds of modern life faded, replaced by birdsong and the rustle of leaves. It was beautiful, in a slightly terrifying, are we completely mad, kind of way. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes of intensely focused driving, the track began to descend. And then, the valley opened up before us. It was breathtaking. Small, meticulously tended plots of vines, looking incredibly ancient with their gnarled, twisted trunks, clung to the steep slopes. A cluster of stone houses, roofs tiled with weathered terracotta, huddled by a babbling brook. Smoke curled lazily from a single chimney. There was no sign of a Starbucks. We found it, Karen whispered, her voice filled with awe. It's real. We parked Serendipity under the shade of a large walnut tree at the edge of what seemed to be the main, albeit unpaved, thoroughfare of the hamlet. It felt presumptuous to drive any further. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant bleating of a goat. It was like stepping into a painting. As we got out, stretching our cramped limbs, an old man emerged from the nearest cottage. He was small and wiry, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, wearing a faded blue work shirt and corduroy trousers. He carried a hoe over his shoulder and regarded us with an expression of intense, unblinking suspicion. This, I suspected, was where Karen's charm offensive, or my terrible French, would meet its ultimate test. Bonjour, monsieur, Karen said, her voice soft and respectful. She has a way about her, a genuine warmth that can usually disarm even the most guarded individuals. The old man just grunted, his eyes narrowed, taking in our van, our obviously foreign attire, and our slightly bewildered expressions. Karen, undaunted, pressed on, speaking slowly in her careful French. We read about your beautiful valley, about the fête du murmure divine. We are very interested in old ways, old traditions. He spat on the dusty ground. Pas de tourists ici, he growled. No tourists here. His message was clear. My heart sank a little. Had we come all this way, navigated that treacherous track, just to be turned away? I could see the disappointment clouding Karen's face, though she tried to hide it. This was the critical juncture. Do we retreat, tails between our legs, or was there another way? I stepped forward, trying to project an air of humble sincerity. Monsieur, I began, choosing my words carefully, nous ne sommes pas de touristes ordinaires, we are not ordinary tourists. Nous voyagens pour apprendre, pour comprendre, we travel to learn, to understand. Votre fête, elle est importante. Pas pour le spectacle, mais pour l'esprit, your festival, it is important. Not for spectacle, but for the spirit. It was a bit high-flown, perhaps, but it was genuine. The old man stared at me for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. I could almost hear the cogs turning in his mind. Then, to my utter astonishment, a flicker of something, curiosity, amusement, crossed his weathered face. He gestured with his chin towards a nearby stone bench. Asseyez-vous, he commanded. Sit down. We sat. He remained standing, leaning on his hoe, studying us. After another prolonged silence, during which a chicken wandered past, pecking idly at the ground, he finally spoke. Pourquoi? Why? Why were we here? Why this interest? This was our chance. Karen began to explain, simply and honestly, about the old blog, about her fascination with preserving traditions, about our life on the road and our desire to connect with the deeper soul of the places we visited. She didn't embellish or try to flatter. She just spoke from the heart. She mentioned the writer, by the rather whimsical name of Professeur Papillon, and the old man's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. When she finished, he was silent again. Then, he nodded slowly. Papillon, he said, the name a soft rumble in his throat. Je me souviens de lui. Curieux, I remember him. A curious man. He looked from Karen to me, and then a slow, creased smile spread across his face, transforming his stern features. The vines, they do not whisper to everyone. But perhaps they will whisper to you. He introduced himself as Jean-Luc, and it turned out he was something of a village elder. He explained that the fête du murmure divin was indeed real, though very small, very private. It was happening in 2 days. It wasn't a performance for outsiders, he stressed, but a deeply felt communal ritual. They didn't advertise it, didn't want it turned into a tourist trap. Their valley, which they called Vallée Profonde, Deep Valley, was their sanctuary. If you wish to stay, he said, his gaze direct, you must work. The vines demand respect. They demand effort before they offer their gifts. We would be honored, Karen replied immediately, her eyes shining. I nodded in agreement, a thrill coursing through me. This was it. This was the moment, the turning point from a wild goose chase to an actual, tangible experience. We weren't just going to observe, we were going to participate. Jean-Luc grunted his approval. He pointed towards a steeply terraced vineyard clinging to the hillside. Tomorrow, at sunrise. We prune the old growth. It is hard work. Good for the soul, bad for the back, he chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. The next 2 days were a blur of activity unlike anything we'd experienced. Sunrise found us in the vineyards with Jean-Luc and a handful of other villagers, a surprisingly spry woman named Sophie who must have been in her late 70s, a quiet, powerful man named Antoine, and a couple of younger folk who had, it seemed, returned to the valley to keep the traditions alive. The work was indeed hard. We learned to identify the fruiting canes, to make the clean, precise cuts that would encourage new growth. Our hands, accustomed to steering wheels and keyboards, quickly became sore and blistered. The sun beat down, and sweat poured off us. My back did indeed complain, loudly. But there was a profound satisfaction in the labor. Working alongside these people, sharing their rhythms, listening to their quiet chatter in a mixture of French and a local dialect we barely understood, we began to feel a sense of connection. They were initially reserved, watchful, but as they saw our genuine effort, our willingness to learn, their suspicion slowly melted away, replaced by a quiet acceptance, even warmth. Sophie would share her water flask with us, offering a shy smile. Antoine, a man of few words, showed me, with patient gestures, the correct way to tie the newly pruned vines. In the evenings, utterly exhausted, we would share simple meals with them, hearty soups, crusty bread, cheese, and of course, their wine. It was unlike any wine I'd ever tasted. It was raw, earthy, full of character, a direct expression of the valley's unique terroir. It tasted of sunshine and hard work and centuries of tradition. And as we sat around a rough wooden table, the stars blazing in the unpolluted sky above Vallée Profonde, they began to share their stories. Stories of their ancestors, of the struggles to keep their way of life alive, of the deep spiritual connection they felt to their land and their vines. Karen, with her gentle questions and genuine interest, drew them out. She learned the names of the different plots of land, the history behind each gnarled old vine. I mostly listened, absorbing the atmosphere, feeling a sense of peace and belonging that was utterly unexpected. We were no longer just observers, we were, in a small way, part of this ancient cycle. We were helping to prepare the vines for their awakening. Then came the day of the fete. It began not with a bang, but with a quiet sense of anticipation. The villagers dressed in simple, traditional clothes, embroidered blouses for the women, clean work shirts for the men. There were no elaborate decorations, no commercial stalls, no amplified music. The festival was an intimate, almost solemn affair, yet shot through with an undercurrent of joy. We gathered in the oldest part of the vineyard, a patch of incredibly ancient, gnarled vines that Jean-Luc said were planted by his great-great-grandfather. He carried a small, carved wooden bowl filled with spring water, and Sophie held a freshly baked loaf of bread, still warm, redolent with herbs. There was a gentle chanting, a series of call-and-response verses in the old dialect, invoking the spirit of the earth, the sun, the rain, asking for a bountiful harvest. Jean-Luc sprinkled the vines with water, and then broke the bread, offering a piece to each person. We, too, were included. The bread was dense and flavorful, the water cool and sweet. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a prayer, a thanksgiving, a deep communion with nature. There was a profound stillness, a sense of tapping into something ancient and powerful. I looked at Karen, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. This was it. This was the whisper of the vines she had been seeking. This was the authentic heart of it all. After the quiet ceremony, the mood shifted. Out came fiddles and an old accordion. The music was lively, a little melancholic, tunes that had clearly been passed down through generations. Someone produced more of that incredible wine. And then, the dancing started. Not choreographed, polished steps, but joyful, spontaneous expressions of community. Sophie, her earlier reserve gone, grabbed my hand and pulled me into the swirling circle. My two left feet protested, but her laughter was infectious, and soon I was stomping and twirling with abandon, much to Karen's amusement. Karen, never one to be left out, was soon dancing with Antoine, her face flushed with happiness. The sun climbed higher, warming the valley. Children, who had been watching shyly from the sidelines, joined in, their laughter echoing off the hillsides. We ate a simple, delicious communal meal of roasted vegetables, local sausages, and more of that wonderful bread, all washed down with the valley's unique wine. We talked, we laughed, we shared stories, or rather, they shared, and we listened, captivated. The language barrier, which had initially seemed so daunting, somehow became less important. Smiles, gestures, the shared experience of hard work and simple joy, these became our common language. We weren't les anglais foes anymore. We were, for this brief, magical day, simply part of their community. We felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, of being privileged to witness and participate in something so pure, so untouched. As the afternoon wore on, and the shadows began to lengthen, a gentle weariness settled over us. The music softened, the dancing became more subdued. There was a sense of contentment, of a ritual completed, of hopes renewed for the coming season. Jean-Luc came over to us, a small, shy smile on his face. "Alors," he said, his eyes twinkling. "The vines, they whispered to you." "Oui, Jean-Luc," Karen replied, her voice thick with emotion. "They shouted." He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound this time. "Bon. It is good." Later that evening, back in Serendipity, parked quietly on the edge of the now silent valley, we sat in comfortable exhaustion. The stars seemed brighter here, the silence deeper. We were both physically tired, muscles aching in places we didn't know we had, hands still tender. But our spirits were soaring. "Well," I said, breaking the silence, that was, without a doubt, Karen's craziest Vanlife idea yet. Karen leaned her head on my shoulder. "And you went along with it," she murmured, her voice soft. "And I am so incredibly glad I did," I admitted. that was one for the ages, my love. Truly, I thought back to my initial skepticism, my concerns about wild goose chases. How wrong I had been. How wonderfully, beautifully wrong. Can you believe it, Mark, she said, her voice full of wonder. That place. Those people. It's like stepping back in time, but in the best possible way. So real, so grounded. We talked for a long time then, reliving the moments of the past few days. The back-breaking work in the vineyard, the taste of that earthy wine, the shy smiles of the children, the sheer, unadulterated joy of the dancing. The way Sophie's eyes lit up when she talked about her grandmother's recipes. Antoine's quiet pride in his vines. Jean-Luc's initial gruffness transforming into genuine warmth. These weren't just memories, they were treasures, little gems we'd store away to polish and admire in the years to come. It's funny, isn't it? Karen mused. We set out with this high-tech van, GPS, all the modern comforts, searching for something ancient and almost forgotten. And we find it, not through technology, but through a 50-year-old blog post, a hand-drawn map, and a willingness to just get lost and talk to people. And a healthy dose of your stubborn optimism, I added, smiling. Let's not forget that crucial ingredient. She squeezed my hand. It makes you realize how much beauty and tradition is still out there, hidden away, if you're willing to look for it, to step off the beaten path. This experience, this whole crazy quest for the fate du murmure divine, felt like a distillation of why we chose this life after 50. It wasn't just about seeing new places, though that's a huge part of it. It was about connection with each other as we navigated these adventures, connection with the history and culture of the places we visited, and connection with the people who call those places home. It was about stripping away the non-essentials and getting down to what truly matters, shared experiences, human warmth, and the quiet joy of discovery. We traded our predictable routines, our comfortable but sometimes stifling suburban life, for the unknown, for the freedom to chase whispers on the wind. And sometimes, as we found in Valais Profonde, those whispers lead you to something truly magical. It reinforced our belief that life doesn't have to slow down or become less adventurous as you get older. In fact, in many ways, it's the perfect time to embrace the unconventional, to say yes to the crazy ideas. You have the experience, hopefully a little wisdom, and perhaps, like us, a partner who's willing to jump in with both feet, even if they're grumbling good-naturedly all the way. Living in a van, you learn to be adaptable. You learn that plans are often just suggestions, and that the best moments frequently arise from the unexpected detours. The breakdown that leads to an encounter with a kind mechanic and his family. The wrong turn that reveals a breathtaking vista. Or, in this case, the slightly mad pursuit of a forgotten festival that turns into one of the most profound and heartwarming experiences of our journey so far. This life isn't always easy. There are challenges, of course. The cramped quarters can sometimes test even the strongest relationship. Finding reliable water sources, dealing with mechanical issues in remote locations, navigating bureaucracy in foreign languages, it all adds to the adventure, but it also requires patience, resilience, and a good sense of humor. But the rewards, like the taste of that ancient wine and the sound of shared laughter in a hidden valley, are immeasurable. They far outweigh the difficulties. As we sat there, the scent of wild thyme drifting in through the open window of serendipity, a deep contentment settled over us. We had faced the unknown, put in the effort, opened ourselves up to a new experience, and been rewarded beyond our wildest dreams. It wasn't just about finding a festival, it was about finding a piece of ourselves, a reminder of the importance of seeking out the authentic, the human, the things that truly nourish the soul. The next morning, we said our goodbyes to Jean-Luc, Sophie, Antoine, and the others. There were hugs, promises to write, though postal service to Valais Profonde seemed like it might be an adventure in itself, and genuine expressions of friendship. Jean-Luc pressed a bottle of his finest, unlabeled wine into my hands. Pour les souvenirs, he said. For the memories. As we carefully navigated serendipity back up that treacherous track, leaving Valais Profond behind, it felt like we were emerging from a dream. But the dust on the van, the lingering scent of wood smoke on our clothes, and the warmth in our hearts were proof that it had all been wonderfully, astonishingly real. Karen's craziest idea yet had turned into a treasure. So, what's next for us? Well, the coast of France still beckons, though we might take a few more detours along the way. Who knows what other forgotten festivals or hidden valleys are waiting to be discovered? That's the beauty of this life, isn't it? Every day is a blank page, waiting for a new story to be written. We'll keep chasing those whispers, embracing the unexpected, and sharing our adventures with all of you. We hope that our journey inspires you, in some small way, to chase your own dreams, whatever they may be, and to remember that it's never too late to try something new, something a little bit crazy. Thank you for joining us on this particular adventure to the Festival of the Whispering Vines. It was a special one, and we're so glad we could share a little bit of its magic with you. What's the craziest travel idea you've ever had, and did you go through with it? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this glimpse into a hidden corner of France, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss what happens next. Until then, keep living fully, keep exploring, and remember our motto: it's all about 1 mile, and one unforgettable story, at a time. Safe travels, everyone.